Have you seen the Swiped documentary on Channel 4? If you're a parent, you'll know this is one of those documentaries that really sticks with you. After watching it, I found myself wanting to wrap my children up in bubble wrap and never let them out of my sight ever again. The stories from families who've suffered losses were absolutely heart-wrenching, and it really made me think about our approaches to mobile phones when it comes to our children and teens. But here's the thing, while the show raised some really valuable points that we're going to discuss in this video, I didn't fully agree with everything that they said. And I felt that a few really crucial points were missed, not mentioned and not addressed at all. So in this video mini-series, I'm going to be sharing my top takeaways from the documentary of Swiped, including the main things that they highlighted as risks to our children, how we can protect them, discuss those crucial points that they missed, plus safety restrictions we can place on the devices of our children who are under the age of 18 to keep them safe and happy, the dangers of actually letting our children use our phones and how we can kind of get around that, plus how we can set healthy boundaries for ourselves as mobile phone users, as adults, because I think gone unchecked, mobile phones can be quite damaging for all of our mental health, and then how we can set these healthy boundaries for ourselves in order to set good examples for our children. So if you're new around here, hi, welcome. My name is Rhiannon Morgan. Everyone calls me Rhi. So glad to have you here. I make videos about mum life, organisation, plus I have 4 children who all have autism. I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, so you get videos about all that good stuff too. I just felt that this was an important subject to talk about, and especially since I've discussed in my real life recently with a few parents of teenagers that didn't know how to do the content restrictions on their children's phones. It really is so easy when you know how, so I'm going to be showing you all of that. So Channel 4's recent documentary, Swiped, the school that banned smartphones, which from here on in we're just going to call Swiped because it's a bit of a long title otherwise. It was a documentary led by Matt and Emma Willis, who have their own children. They have teenagers that have mobile phones, smartphones specifically themselves, and they were taking part in this study. They followed a group of year 8 kids in a school called the Stanway School who agreed to give up all devices, smartphones, tablets, game consoles, laptops for 21 days. Some of the teachers in the school took part in the study too, as well as Matt and Emma Willis themselves, but interestingly not their children. At first, the students really struggled with signs of withdrawal and they were really missing their devices. And in fact, the adults had a little bit of this too. I think it was Matt Willis, the husband, who was concerned that he'd feel these signs of withdrawal, but actually it was his wife Emma that struggled a little bit more with the FOMO and the sort of feeling of isolation that she wasn't connected to the rest of the world by not having her smartphone. So having gone through these withdrawal symptoms in a similar way to people would from giving up anything that they're kind of addicted to, caffeine, alcohol, the children initially felt bored and restless and didn't know what to do with themselves, but ultimately over the course of the weeks, their sleep improved, they became more focused, and their overall mental health and ability to concentrate seemed to improve. So why was this, and do we have to be as dramatic as removing smartphones altogether to achieve these outcomes? And I would argue that perhaps we don't, but we'll get to that. So while the documentary pointed out the risks that smartphones pose, I think it's really important to note that it's not actually the smartphone device itself that poses a problem. The smartphone device is a neutral entity and it can be used for good or for evil, I suppose. And really, it's not the phones that are the problem, it's the way in which they are used. And this very much goes for adults as well as for children. Smartphones can have amazing benefits as well as totally toxic, problematic downsides. But with the right tools like parenting controls, healthy habits, restrictions for kids and for adults, then we can utilize our devices in a way that can enhance our lives as opposed to really be detrimental to them. So instead of giving the kids tools and boundaries, they took these devices away altogether to study the impacts, and here's what they found. Kids can be exposed to really horrific content online. So in one part of the documentary, They were actually given blank smartphones. They were going through a smartphone detox, but they were given blank smartphones and set up brand new email addresses. And Matt and Emma Willis set up accounts each. I think they were posing as 13-year-olds. So they set up brand new accounts and they went onto TikTok with totally clean slate, no search history, nothing, because they were brand new email addresses, brand new accounts. They'd told TikTok that they were 13 years old and therefore were expected to be served content that was age appropriate. And initially it was all pretty innocent. I think Emma Willis was being served typical kind of more girl content. Matt Willis was being shown a lot of stuff about roller coasters. But that very quickly took a very dark turn. And within not that many hours of scrolling, they were being shown incredibly disturbing content. I'm not going to go into depth as to exactly what that content was right here, right now. If you want to learn about exactly what it was they were exposed to, then please do go and watch the documentary. I do think it's really valuable watching, even though I feel like missed out a couple of points. It's very well put together. So suffice to say, the content was violent. It was graphic. None of this they searched for, all of it was served to them through explore pages and just content being shown to them without them actually searching or requesting it. They were pretty horrified, as I was actually. Now, obviously, this is not a smartphone problem exactly, this very specific TikTok example. This is a TikTok problem. I guess what I want to say is just because children are having a smartphone, it does not mean that they have access to social media, depending on the restrictions that you place on the device. And we will be going into all of this in more depth. But I think really what's worth highlighting and mentioning is that if specific apps or specific social media platforms are damaging to children, that does not mean the smartphone as a whole is damaging to children. It's to do with what they're allowed to access and restrictions and boundaries that are put in place. So the next point was, in fact, that social media was increasing anxiety in kids. The students were really, really addicted to their social media platforms. Most of them were checking their phones as soon as they woke up. They were up really late checking them. They were on doom scroll mode for hours and hours every day. But they also admitted that it made them feel kind of anxious all the time. Now, obviously, what we can do is limit the time that we spend on certain apps, especially if we know they're going to have these impact on them, or ultimately delete them altogether. I actually have, even for myself, limits set up. So after a certain amount of time, and I will go into this in a future video, how to set this all up, I have restrictions on certain apps on my phone that I know it is not healthy to spend lots of time inside of. And after a certain amount of time, those apps will turn off. One of which, even though I use it for work, is Instagram. By having these limitations where children, or adults for that matter, are only allowed to spend a set amount of time on certain apps, it forces them to step away from this constant like comment cycle and do something else. So another point that is super valid, and I totally agree with, is that smartphones can disrupt sleep. And I know this is the case for adults as well as children. Hands up if you have ever gone to sleep later than you should have done because you found yourself doom scrolling and then you suddenly realised you've been doing that for hours and you should have been asleep and you're going to be tired the next morning. If that's a trap that us adults can fall into, it's definitely a trap that children can fall into also. And my children can't actually do this because at certain times of the evening, their phones shut off almost entirely. They can still ring or text me. They can listen to audiobooks because they have certain audiobooks they like to listen to in order to fall asleep. They can read books, and other than that, they pretty much can't do anything on their phones at all. So if you have the proper restrictions in place, children can't physically doom scroll till the middle of the night because those apps shut off totally. I have the same restrictions on my phone, and although I am an adult and I actually know the passcode, so I could override it if I wanted to, that element of it turning off is enough of a jolt to be like, no, you really shouldn't put the passcode in and carry on doom scrolling. You should go to sleep. I totally agree that sleep is so valuable, and the anxiety of being woken up by notifications and 10 more minutes, 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes, and that going on into hours and hours in the night, and then feeling groggy and not fresh for the day and just not ready to learn the next day. That sounds awful. This is why, on top of having apps that actually go off and cannot be accessed at certain times of the night, it's also important to set up focus modes so you have do not disturb hours during the day, and this can be all happening automatically on automation, so it's not like ping, 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 ping. I know personally if I left all of my notifications on all the time and looked at my phone every time there was a notification, I would literally never get anything done ever. Between all the parents, WhatsApp groups, please don't be offended if you know me in real life and you're in one of these groups, but they're all muted forever on my phone so that I can choose when I go into my phone, open those up and consume that content, and it's not ping, 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 stressing me out and giving me anxiety all day long. So in the documentary, they also noted that the phones reduced real life social skills, which obviously is a really disturbing outcome. That's not anything that any parent wants. And then when the phones were taken away, they were having real conversations, they were having dinner together, and everyone seemed to generally have a more harmonious family life. Now, obviously, this can be achieved without removing smartphones altogether, because if you have restrictions either directly on your children's devices or just boundaries within your home, like no phones in the dining room, or no phones during these hours or in this setting, or screen time limits that once they've been on their phone a certain amount of time, regardless of the app or time of the day, most of it other than emergency contacts and messaging switches off. The boundaries that you choose to set with your family obviously are entirely up to you, but it is possible to set these boundaries, and I know this because it's something that we've done. I know that screen time would be a massive problem in our house if I didn't have these restrictions in place. But I am really pleased to say that there is light at the end of the tunnel if you are struggling with this kind of stuff. The restrictions that we've put in place, both with kind of house rules and physical restrictions that I control entirely from my phone and can monitor my children's phones from my phone, they just really, really help. Smartphone addiction is real. They really did note that this withdrawal was really prominent in the children. This is because smartphone notifications trigger a bit of a dopamine hit, and this is the same brain system activated as caffeine or even alcohol or drugs. So every time a kid gets a new message or a notification or a like or a comment, they were getting that mini dopamine hit, which obviously they were craving when that was removed. Now, in a practical sense, we can limit these dopamine hitting apps by having them switch off on automation at certain hours of the day or automatically after a certain amount of time has been reached. So another real problem, which I've spoken to so many parents about, and this does seem to be a huge problem across the board, is cyberbullying and this following children home. Now, I know when I was in school, it's going to make me sound super old, isn't it? When I was in school, if you wanted to speak to someone outside of school, you had to phone their house, physically dial their house, speak to their mum, and then ask to speak to the person. And now people can kind of get to you wherever you are as long as you are on your phone. Children having to deal with bullying in school is awful, but if that bullying just never shuts off because they're having notifications pinging all night and constantly, and they don't even have a safe space at home because the bullies can get to them wherever they are, I cannot imagine how awful that must be for a child. So while Swiped didn't put a massive emphasis on the bullying, I know it is a big problem. There are things that we can do with restrictions that we'll talk about when we get to that, about restricting who your child is able to communicate with, either during certain hours or indeed in total from their mobile phone. I know that my children's devices are totally restricted. I have complete control over their contacts. They have to request to add a new contact, and it's only people that are physically in their contact that they are able to communicate with. Now, trigger warning, I'm going to talk about the two most upsetting parts of the Swipe documentary, and if you haven't seen the documentary yet, just to let you know, because it was really hard to watch. There were two families who had lost children, one in the first episode and one in the second episode of the two-part series. And their stories were just awful. I felt sick to my stomach and like I just wanted to go and squeeze my children, wrap them up in bubble wrap and never let them out of my sight ever again. That's how I feel whenever I hear any of these horror stories about parents who have needlessly and senselessly lost their precious children. I can't imagine how awful that must be. I don't think any of us as parents even want to think about that. It's just too upsetting. So as much as I'd love to protect my children from everything ever, I'm fully aware that's not practical. So we need to look at the next best thing, how we can protect them in lieu of the wrapping them up in bubble wrap and locking them up and never letting them leave the house ever approach. It did make me think I need to make sure that our policies are reevaluated frequently, that I need to have frequent check-ins with my children's devices. There are always updates. I need to make sure that the most up-to-date restrictions are in place, that restrictions haven't changed. They know, check that they don't have access to anything they shouldn't be able to see, and to monitor the content that they are consuming on their phones and discuss this with them frequently. I frequently do have and will continue to have open conversations with my children about the dangers of being online. And I think one of the biggest things is having open conversations about the kind of things they're consuming, and for them to know that they can come to me and discuss and give them opportunities to discuss anything that they see at all that makes them in any way uncomfortable. So which solution was proposed in this documentary, and why is it perhaps not going to be the best solution? So the biggest suggestion from the documentary was banning all smartphones until age 14. And while in theory this is a great idea, it does have some downsides. On the surface of it, great idea. Protect them for as long as possible, amazing. But ultimately, some of the content that they were exposed to, Emma and Matt, in this documentary, is stuff that I wouldn't even want a 14-year-old seeing. And quite frankly, I'm 41 and I don't want to see it. If we just say, right, we'll ban phones till 14, but if we don't put things in place to protect children from 14 and up, and we just hand them a smartphone at 14 without teaching them about boundaries, without putting proper restrictions in place, we're just going to delay the problem till age 14, and then the problem will be just as bad. So I would argue that actually we need to have slightly more of a holistic approach where the children are being protected, but by monitoring and restricting content that they can access, but also really teaching them healthy habits and boundaries. And ultimately, we need to look at our own smartphone usage and how we having a good, healthy relationship and healthy boundaries with our smartphones so we can model that behavior for our children. Because I think most of us would agree that a lot of us adults have an equally unhealthy relationship with, if not an even unhealthier relationship with smartphones than some of these children. So another really key point raised in the documentary was the idea that government intervention is needed so that we can protect our children online. And while I completely agree that that would be super helpful, as a parent of children now, it definitely needs doing and it needs addressing, but I'm also aware of how slow and clunky these things are. And I know that I need to take action to protect my children now and not wait for someone in government or the social media companies or something to take action to protect my children, because that's probably going to be a little bit too little, too late for my children. So this is why I really believe it's important to protect our children by making sure that we have our devices and their devices linked up so that we can monitor exactly what they're doing. We can keep them safe. We can protect them from seeing things that we don't want them to see, communicating with people that we would not want them communicating with, all the while teaching them healthy habits. So click on the video on screen now where I show you the easy way that I use my own phone to set up parental restrictions for my children's smart devices in order to keep them safe. And I'll see you over there.